I call your name, every fear is banished from here. When you call my name, I'll come running, running to you. And you say, come to me. Spread your wings, catch the wind, he's carrying you.
Shalom and good evening. Welcome to this live edition of Jerusalem Dispatch, ICEJ UK. We are live and interactive on Zoom, so I want to welcome you to this special edition as we have a special guest all the way from Israel. Her name is Danielle Moore, and she is the director for the Christian Friends of the Jewish Agency. But I want to remind you that this, through the ministry of ICEJ UK, we are bringing you a closer connection to Israel and to the Jewish people, particularly at this time. We called it the last Jerusalem Dispatch, which was ICEJ UK's program. And what we focused on there was Aliyah, and in particular, the plight of the Ethiopian Jews who are in a desperate situation, who kind of need help. So we're very much looking forward to what Danielle has to say. But before we do, I'll hand you over to David Elms, who's the director of ICEJ UK, just to pray for the programme and just give us an update on some of the activities being carried out by ICEJ UK.
Right, well, thank you, Simon, and welcome to everyone. And particularly tonight, we're so looking forward to hearing Danielle and the ministry of the Jewish Agency, which is the most influential body within Israel regarding Aliyah. And Aliyah has always been a key feature of our ministry within the Christian Embassy right from the start, as part of our mandate from Isaiah 40, that we were to bring comfort to God's people in Israel. And up to date now, our focus is on the Ethiopian Jews. And I mean, these poor people who are subject to war, to famine, to all sorts of difficulties. And we're now seeing 200 people just arriving back in Israel. And I'm sure that Danielle will give us a more up-to-date information on that as well. But a very important feature of the work within the UK and through our branches throughout all of the world, really. And it's quite interesting for me because I had a question asked the other day. Somebody wrote into me and they said, why is it if we've got the same Bible as the Jewish people, why does it end differently? And it's a very good question. Now, it would take me most of the session to give you an overview even of the different perspectives on that. But the Tanakh, which of course we're concentrating on and thinking about tonight, that ends with 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And there it's speaking about the raising up of Cyrus. And the exact words are, the final words in the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, it says, and any one of you, his people, the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. And so it closes with the very mention of Aliyah. And I find this so exciting and so interesting. The Christian Bible, I'll just mention in passing, is more an eschatological view of the future about the prophet from Micah and so on. But here, and what we're talking about tonight and what we're going to hear is about the Jews coming back to their land. And we've looked at it many times, how God one day is going to call them from the ends of the world. I'm so glad that I'm alive today to see this happen before my very eyes. And again, I'm especially privileged as well, because I'll never forget the age of Israel, because it's my age. So, I mean, I was delighted when Israel was 21. And I was quite happy when it was 30. But once I got up to 70, oh boy. But anyway, tonight, here we go. You're in for a treat. We're going to be so blessed, so grateful that Danielle is able to be with us. So can I just commit the evening to the Lord? And we thank you, our Lord God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We thank you, Lord, that when you make a covenant, you keep your word. Heaven and earth could pass away, but your words will never pass away. We thank you, Lord, that you send out your word to achieve a purpose and a plan. And Lord, even though we can't understand all the suffering and the hardship in the world, Lord God, what we do understand is that your greater plan, the plan of destiny, the plan and purpose of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be fulfilled. And so tonight, Lord, as we give you this meeting, we pray for everyone, especially, Lord, for Danielle and the work of the Jewish Agency, that, Lord, that we will leave here not just enlightened, but our souls and our spirits lifted high. Lord, we commit the meeting into your hands in the wonderful name of our Messiah. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And just want to remind you what a year 2021 has been. So let's have a look at 2021 through the eyes of the ministry that is ICEJ UK.
2021 was an amazing year for the International Christian Embassy right here in Jerusalem. Thanks to the help from you and many other Christians from around the world, we could impact the nation of Israel, the very city of Jerusalem, in an even greater way than last year. Please have a look to what the Lord did through us in 2021.
2021 has been a great year in ICEJ Aid. At the Haifa home, we've been able to upgrade the shared living space and physiotherapy room. We've also installed an elevator in the new building, and we're just about to begin taking in new residents. Also, we've expanded our outreach to survivors outside the home through a call center. Already, that call center receives 2,800 calls a month. Another milestone in 2021 was when we delivered our 150th shelter to protect vulnerable communities. 42 of those were ordered just this year, and that number continues to climb. We're also really excited that we were able to help strengthen many more families through food packages, home repairs, vocational training, or scholarships that help them towards a brighter future.
I want to thank you for helping us make 2021 an amazing year. This year, ICEJ helped more than 3,000 immigrants return to their biblical homeland. We've reached the total of over 163,000 during the history of ICEJ. And while many people are shutting down because of COVID, we've had 2 amazing years of a virtual Feast of Tabernacles. This last Feast of Tabernacles, we had almost 5,000 participants from over 100 nations. While the world's shutting down because of COVID, God has given ICEJ the grace to flourish and do more and be more. So let's celebrate together an amazing 2021.
In our international work over the last year, we experienced a paradox, because normally we would travel a lot, but we couldn't do that because of the lockdowns and the travel restrictions. And yet, we have seen a great improvement of communication, both in quality and quantity. In these online meetings, we were able to have good communication with many offices which we have around the world, and some new people joined us. So we were able to start new offices in several countries of Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Africa. Many other people joined us for our numerous prayer initiatives, starting with the weekly global prayer gatherings and also these amazing prayer chains at the beginning of each Hebrew month, the Rosh Chodesh. The Lord has used this crisis to raise awareness about His plan for Israel and for the nations. And we are so grateful that we can be part of that.
Another important moment for our ministry came in May when Israel faced its 4th rocket war with Hamas in Gaza in the past 12 years. There were hundreds of rockets flying every day into Israel, where the security threat is growing. So it's more than 150 bomb shelters that we're now helping Israel protect itself. We're also giving firefighting equipment and fire protection suits to the first responders to help them protect their communities. So So the Christian Embassy is doing all these things to help Israel keep safe.
We had a great impact this year in Israel, and together we can do so much more in the future. We are so grateful for your support, for your generous donations to the ICEJ that has made it possible for us to increase our work at the ICEJ, our Aliyah work, our Holocaust survivor work, bomb shelters, and educating the church, connecting you to Israel, informing you what is happening right here in Israel, but also from a biblical perspective. So thank you once again for your great support. We are very thankful for that, and may God do great things for you also.
So you have seen what we have been doing in 2021 here in Israel and also right here in the city of Jerusalem. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support, for standing with us in prayer, in your finances, and also in your support in your country. And I want to wish you the blessing of the Lord as you are standing with Israel and as you are blessing God's chosen people. I do ask you to prayerfully consider also to stand in 2022 on the side of the International Christian Embassy, your embassy right here in the land of Israel.
I think you can all agree that ICEJ UK has been a blessing to Israel in 2021, and it's great to see Jerusalem. It feels like a very long time since we've been there and stood in the streets of Jerusalem and looking on that fabulous city, which we know is God's city. Well, our special guest is all the way from Israel today. Her name is Danielle Moore. She is the founding director of Christian Friends of the Jewish Agency for Israel, and also Vice President for Israel and Global Philanthropy. She was born in Connecticut. Danielle made Aliyah from the United States with her family as a child. She was a commander in the Israeli Air Force and later completed degrees in international relations, sociology, and organizational counseling in all distinctions at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Danielle's been working for the Jewish Agency for about 20 years, first with the former ambassador to Israel, Meridor, then the emissary to the United States for Israel's Educational Fund, returning to Israel as the Director of Strategic and Development for Aliyah, Absorption and Special Operations Unit, and has recently been promoted to a current role as the founding director of Christian Friends of the Jewish Agency and Vice President for Israel and Global Philanthropy. Over the years, Danielle's been deeply involved in the Jewish Agency's Ethiopia project, Aliyah, for Jews from the Ukraine and also from France, and programs for Holocaust survivors, and also funding for the victims of terror. But before we introduce Danielle to you, let's have a look at the quite remarkable work being carried out by the Jewish Agency, also reaching out to the Christian community throughout the world.
After the Jewish people were exiled from their land and dispersed among the nations some 2,000 years ago, they continue to pray that next year they will be in Jerusalem. The term used for describing this miracle-like return is Aliyah, to go up. Today, Aliyah refers to the return of the Jews to their homeland, the land of Israel. In 1929, the Jewish Agency for Israel was founded with the goal of fulfilling the 2,000-year-old prayer of the Jewish people to be re-established as a nation in the land promised to them. The Jewish Agency built hundreds of new communities, paved roads, provided electricity, laid the water system, and established the first Jewish army in 2,000 years. In 1948, the Jewish Agency established the State of Israel. Its chairman, David Ben-Gurion, became Israel's first prime minister. In 1952, the government of Israel passed a law to grant the Jewish Agency special status to work on Israel's behalf in increasing Aliyah and to serve as the official link between the State of Israel and Jewish communities everywhere. Today, the Jewish Agency continues its role as the link between Israel and the Jewish diaspora, working in over 80 countries to connect Jews to their heritage and their homeland. In Israel, the Jewish Agency uplifts the vulnerable as it assists victims of terror, gives housing and loving care to Holocaust survivors, mentors thousands of at-risk children, and trains young adults from Israel's weakest neighborhoods, be they Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, to serve as the future leaders of Israel. To this day, Aliyah is the Jewish Agency's central mission. Whether they are immigrating to Israel to fulfill a dream and spiritual goals, or to escape the nightmare of violent anti-Semitism, the Jewish Agency stands by their side and guides them every step of the way. Once in Israel, thousands live in the Jewish Agency's 21 absorption centers. Here, we assist these new immigrants with everything, from housing to Hebrew classes. We help the children acclimate to school and provide professional training for adults. Our goal is to help them establish roots in the land, as said in Jeremiah 32:41.
I will rejoice over them to do them good. I will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and soul.
Dear friends, it is encouraging for us to know that Israel has devoted and good friends, such as yourselves, amongst Christians from all over the world. I have been serving Israel and the Jewish people throughout my life. I have served in numerous positions in Israeli public life, in politics. I was a minister in different positions, and I was a member of the Israeli Security Cabinet. Today, I serve as the chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, which is the biggest Jewish organization in the world, which fulfills the mission to unite the Jewish people with Israel and Israel with the Jewish people, and bring the Jewish people to their ancient homeland. I believe this is a mission that we all share. Thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your support. Let's work together to make the world a better place. And let's work together to make Israel a safer place.
Thousands of Jews pray to make Aliyah. After 2,000 years, you have the opportunity to fulfill this prayer. Pray for us. Visit and make your best gift. With each donation, we will bless Israel together and change the lives of those most in need. Partner with us to see biblical prophecies fulfilled. The Jewish Agency for Israel, every one of us, together.
That's a great video there produced by the Jewish Agency that gives us real insight into the work that Danielle Moore is doing. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us from Israel. I apologize, it's late. It's after 10 p.m. in Israel. So we're so grateful that you can be here. You've got an incredible CV. You're doing incredible work on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. But can we start off the beginning? Can you share something about your remarkable family? Your father coming from Iran, or originally Persia as it was then, and through your mother's line coming from Ukraine and fleeing the pogroms and at the turn of the century and ending up in the United States of America.
So thank you so much, Simon, and thank you to David and ICEJ UK for hosting me here with you tonight, this evening. So yes, Simon, you know, the story of my family is in many ways not special. It's not different than many stories of Israelis that you'd meet today. But you know, the fact that you meet one story time and again does not make it in any way ordinary, does not make it not miraculous. It just shows you that there is a certain path, that there is a certain direction that is being followed by many. Because what in fact happened with my family is that whereas my father's family that comes from Iran, where, you know, also the Bible tells us about the first exile, and we know that Jews have been living in Iran for well over 2,000 years. They were there for generations, praying that, you know, at some point next year, they will be in Jerusalem. My mother's side of the family comes from what is today Belarus and Ukraine. And there it is also assumed that they lived for approximately 700 years, if we trace, Jewish history. So what are the chances of, a lady coming from those parts of the world, Ukraine and Belarus, to come and meet with a young man from Iran? Well, the answer is the chances are very small, and it's really part of the miracle of Israel. Because whereas my father's family, in 1948, my grandfather, my late grandfather, heard on the radio the voice of Ben-Gurion announcing the establishment of the state. And as my grandmother tells it, he simply, turned off the radio after the broadcast and told her, "We are going." And they had a small baby, my father, and they just left everything. And they came to Israel and were warmly welcomed into a tent. And they lived in that tent for almost a year. And my mother's family, around the turn of the century, life in Belarus and in Ukraine became very difficult. There was a whole string of pogroms that was afflicting Jews at that time, including a certain time where they had to leave everything, and they managed to bury some of their prized possessions in the ground just before running away. When they came back, they found that everything was burnt down. There was nothing left. And even of what they buried in the ground, there was really nothing left apart from one Chanukiah menorah that my great-great-grandfather made himself as an apprentice to a tinsmith. He prepared that Chanukiah himself. He built it as a gift to his mother. He buried it in the ground before running away. And that was the only thing that they were able to find after the pogrom. I can share with you that Chanukiah has also made Aliyah. And it is today, almost more than 100 years after it was created. It's making light and telling the story of freedom and of faith here in Jerusalem today. Well, my mother's family, they had to flee after that horrible event, and the doors of the world were closed except for the United States. And that's where they came to. And years later, in 1967, my mother is an inspired young Jewish adult. She hears a voice on the radio. It's not Ben-Gurion anymore, but it is Rabin and other generals talking about how, the Temple Mount is in our hands. And she understands that she has one place to go to. And there on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, she meets my father. And, here I am.
That's a fabulous story. Danielle, can you tell the story about growing up in Jerusalem? I mean, I think you spent your early life in the United States. Then your family made Aliyah to Israel. What was it like growing up in the streets of Jerusalem as a child? And what are some of your fond childhood memories of Israel?
So, growing up in Israel as a child, Jerusalem was smaller than it is today. And there was a wonderful feeling, after we made Aliyah, to be with my father's family, a very big, warm, loud, with great food, Iranian Jewish family. And, there were parts of childhood that were, very warm. But then when you live in Israel, there are also the parts that are difficult and that can be frightening also at times. And you need to have a lot of faith and hope. Because when you grow up in an environment where you know that, any bus you take to a youth movement activity or to visit a friend or to, run errands downtown, there was a certain point when I was in my young teenage years where there were so many terrorist attacks. There were so many suicide bombers. And you started developing these habits of, should I be close to the door? Should I be in the back? Should I be in the front? Looking at every single person that comes on the bus if they seem suspicious to you. And that was, just kind of the environment of growing up. Two of my friends were actually wounded in a terrorist attack. And, thank God, solutions were found. Part of them was actually building the separation wall, which brought a lot of security in that sense and stopped a lot of those suicide bombers. But, you still see it today. And today, as a mother, I can't tell you that there are times when, you're praying for the safety of your children and that there's something very real that you're concerned about.
Yeah, it's a very, very dangerous time to be in Israel. Back then, particularly during the Second Intifada, I spent a lot of time out there, and you would just had to have your wits about you. And seeing Jerusalem, I think about 2002 was like a ghost town. No one was walking down Ben Yehuda Street, no one walking around the city centre, not like it is today. So it's thanks to Israel's innovation creating that security fence and protecting the citizens of Israel that Israel is so much safer now than it was back then. But Danielle, you also served your time in the Israeli Defense Force. You were an officer in the Israeli Air Force, and you got to wear that nice beige uniform rather than the green olive uniform. Share with us your experience in the Israeli Air Force.
Yeah, so I was very excited to join the IDF, and I was screened to serve in a position that, you know, the title that they gave it was the eyes of the country, because I was based in an air radar unit in the north of the country, with this kind of like a hush location. And, you know, serving in that role was very meaningful because you felt that you had a lot of responsibility. And at the same time, I wanted to do more. I don't know if it's thanks to the beautiful beige uniform that inspired me or not, but yeah, you're right. It does look a lot better than the green. And I volunteered to become an officer. And by doing so, it put me on a different path as far as the role that I could fill. And I actually got the opportunity to serve in a role where I was meant to encourage young women in the IDF to volunteer to become officers, and then to handle their screening process. There were many stages to the screening process to determine who can become an officer in the IDF. I myself filled that role as a very junior officer. I finished my Army service when I was a young lieutenant. And it was a very meaningful service because you know that you're helping to build part of the future leadership of the Air Force, of protecting Israel. And one of the things that was very special to me at the time, and this is, you know, years before I started working in areas of Aliyah, so I don't think I, you know, appreciated that at the time. But one of the women that put forward her candidacy was from the Ethiopian Jewish community. Now, mind you, we're talking about a time when there were far fewer members of the Ethiopian community living in Israel, and the number of women among them that joined the army and that then were accepted to the Air Force was really very small. So there weren't that many. And she had the courage to, you know, put forward her candidacy to become an officer. And just based on, you know, dry criteria, she didn't make the cut because so many of the tests that are done in these situations are culturally biased. So she didn't make the cut. And it was clear that on, you know, the face of it, she couldn't ever become an officer in the Air Force. But looking at it a little bit more deeply, it was clear that she had so much potential and that it's really just not fair to judge her according to culturally biased tests. And so it was really a beautiful process for me to be able to be there and to push forward and to insist that this lady has to become an officer. And she became the first woman officer in the Air Force of the Ethiopian Jewish community. And really, I could have never guessed that years later I would be working so closely with that community.
That's an incredible story, Danielle. And can you also share with us why you declined to actually work for the Israeli Prime Minister and work in the Prime Minister's office, but instead you chose the Jewish Agency? Tell us that story.
Well, Simon, I wouldn't be so quick to describe it, you know, just like publicly like that I declined to work for the Prime Minister. It makes it seem, you know, very, I don't know, snobbish or something. But no, I was after my IDF service and I was preparing to go into university. And I thought, you know, I had 10 months to work before I would start, you know, a full-time university education, not really leaving a lot of time for work. So I was just looking for something temporary. And I was sent to be interviewed in the office of the Prime Minister of Israel. At the time, it was Ehud Barak, and also at the office of the Prime Minister, of the chairman of the Jewish Agency. And I was accepted to both positions, actually. And again, it's kind of hard to explain because everyone that I told, yes, I chose to work for the Jewish Agency, they couldn't believe that I passed the opportunity to work for the Prime Minister's office. But, you know, sometimes people make decisions based on something that's in their heart, you know, and not necessarily something that's in their mind. And so I made that choice, and I've never regretted it.
Excellent. So can you share with us what you do for the Jewish Agency? You've been working for the Jewish Agency now for almost 20 years. I think the video that we showed earlier gives an excellent overview of the Jewish Agency and the work that you're involved in. But can you share with us your role at the Jewish Agency? Because the fact is that you are the director of the Christian Friends of the Jewish Agency, I think shows so much how relations between Israel and evangelical Christians has grown so much that you've got your own position where you actually appointed to win Christian support for the incredible work that you're doing. And I know that the Jewish Agency works extremely closely with ICEJ.
Yes, Simon. So, when you're a person that loves and appreciates history, and I'm a person like that, so you learn that that when you examine the past, it really sets you on this understanding of what is your present and what could potentially be your future. And when you look at the history of the Zionist movement, and you see that from so early on, it was actually really wonderful also British supporters, Christian British supporters, that in different ways, even if it's people like George Eliot, for example, and her wonderful Daniel Deronda, or whether it's later political leaders also, whether it's Lord Balfour, or whether it's even to some degree, efforts that were made by Winston Churchill, and definitely also different thought leaders and pastors that were part of the British Christian community. And you understand that really from very early on, there was a connection between Zionism and Christianity. And you're looking at that, it just seems so amazing, because when you think about 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian relations, and you really see the horrors that were in that relationship, and how really Christianity and the name of Christianity persecuted Jews really in the worst imaginable ways. And then you see that at this time when Zionism is arising, there's also another phenomenon that is arising with it. And with the rebirth of the state of Israel, this starts to become a movement. The birth of ICEJ came years later, but it rests on so much that started before. So you realize that something here is happening. There is a historic process that is happening. And then when you get the opportunity to step into that story and to ask yourself, what can be my role in it? Where do I fit in? Can I fit in? And is there a way that I can make a contribution? So to me, it became clear that there is an evolution here of relationships between Jews and Christians that can truly make a difference, has made a difference in the establishment of Israel and the growth of Israel. And you understand that when you read the Bible and when you see these events taking shape and form before your eyes, you know that it's a meaningful place to be. And so I made that choice through the work that I've been doing for Aliyah and for working with vulnerable populations in Israel, to really reach out and to find ways to make the relationship between Jews and Christians a little bit, one step at a time, closer to what perhaps it was meant to be from the start. And we know that we're praying in so many ways for similar things. We agree on so much, and we share so much in our heritage. So we need to walk in the present together and pray for the future together.
Absolutely. It's incredibly exciting times, because over the last 2 decades in particular, we've seen that wall of petition between Israel, the Jewish community, and the evangelical Christian community, or the Christian Zionists, as it were, have that relationship with Israel and Jewish people, and that we are mutually blessed from it. And we get a blessing from standing with Israel, standing with the Jewish people, and befriending the Jewish people like yourself. It's something very, very special, and something that is pretty unique, really, to this generation in the scale of Christians who love Israel from around the world. But you follow in your father's footsteps, didn't you? So you thought that you were unique. You thought that you were alone in this pioneering work, but your father beat you to it. Explain how he did it.
Well, yeah, Simon, that's so funny. That's really a funny story because I had no idea. You know, my father is a very strong storyteller. Kind of, you know, being an Iranian Jew, you have a flair for drama that kind of goes along with that ethnicity in a way. And he told me so many stories, you know, about his army service, growing up in Old Jerusalem, being worried about the Jordanian snipers, you know, all these stories that made him look really good. But there were some stories that he never shared. And at one point, after I got this position to become director of Christian Friends, so, you know, I was over a Shabbat meal, I was sharing with my family, you know, hey, I got this new role and it's really exciting. And, you know, what do you think? And I was sure that they were going to say, what? You know, how did, you know, where did that come from? You know, that it was just totally out of the blue for them. And my father said, yeah, no, that actually makes sense. And I said, what do you mean it makes sense? And he says, well, you know, you're just, you know, kind of doing what I did. I did that role too. And I said, what do you mean you did that role too? Like, my father's an engineer, you know, when did you do that role too? And then he told me, no, when I was a young Israeli student after my parents married. So they lived in the United States for a number of years. And I was a young Israeli student studying in an American university. And I met a pastor who was excited to meet a young man from Israel. And I obviously was impressed with my father's sense for drama, and asked him, would he be willing to come to churches and to tell on, you know, during Sunday, to tell his story, to talk about Israel, to talk about what Israel really is about. This was the early 70s. And amazingly enough, my father said yes. And for a few months, he had this tour on Sundays of Christian churches in the Northeast of the United States. And he loved it.
Fabulous. I love guys that can tell stories. So thank you for sharing that story. Danielle, can you also talk pretty much about what is the remit of the Jewish Agency? Because it was 2 years ago, wasn't it, that the Jewish Agency celebrated its 90th anniversary, which is an incredible achievement that predates the modern state of Israel, and actually provided the infrastructure for the pre-state, as it were. And we saw in that excellent video news report that we saw from the Jewish Agency that Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, was the chairman of the Jewish Agency.
Yes, so the Jewish Agency was founded back in 1929, and it was a very special effort by Chaim Weizmann, who I'm sure that a lot of you know, not only because he was then the first president of Israel, but also because he did become a very proud British citizen after completing his education in Switzerland and really being part of British life and having such strong connections with members of parliament and leadership and the science community. So Chaim Weizmann, being the head of the Zionist movement, had a vision of establishing the Jewish people as a nation in the land promised to them. And he realized that the tools for making this vision come to be were not tools at hand with the current organizations and the way that people align themselves with those organizations. And so he made a bold decision to actually go out and establish a new organization. And he was the one who established the Jewish Agency for Israel back in 1929. Establishing it as an organization that represents all of the Jewish people. So whereas until then, from the start of Zionism, the Jewish world was kind of divided to those who actively identified as Zionists and wanted to move their lives to Israel, and those that did not identify as Zionists because they felt that maybe the UK is their home, or that United States is their home, or that Germany is their home. And Weizmann realized that in order to bring about this vision for the entire Jewish people, he needs to bring together all of the Jewish people, those that identify as Zionists and those that do not. And in doing that, he established a new organization, the Jewish Agency, and tasked it with being the organization that will give a national home to all of the Jewish people. Now, naturally, the leaders of the Jewish Agency were all Zionists, but they learned to work alongside and for the entire Jewish people. And it's really unbelievable when you think that the organization was established in 1929, and then really just less than 20 years later, the state of Israel is born. If you remember the vision of Herzl, which was set out in his book back in 1897 when he published his book, he wrote that you might think that I'm crazy or that I'm a dreamer, but in 5, 10, or no more than 50 years, there will be a Jewish state. And he said that in 1897, and, he was off by, just a few months, going into 1948. But the role of the Jewish Agency has evolved over the years from being the organization that establishes infrastructure, that establishes the first Jewish army, that builds communities, that then establishes the state of Israel. And then from that point on, becoming the organization that, because it has that unique DNA of representing all of the Jewish people, to act on behalf of both the Jewish people and the government of Israel to serve and to strengthen the connection to Israel, to build Israeli society, and to bring about an aliyah. We kind of call it today the A, B, and C. A, the aliyah to Israel, B, the building of Israeli society, and C, the connecting of the global Jewish people to one another. We work in 66 countries around the world, plus Israel. And today we're considered the largest Jewish organization. We impact the lives of close to 1 million of our people. And I know that in Christian terms, maybe that doesn't sound a lot, but if you count the Jewish people as about 14 million, that's a big number.
No, absolutely. And can share, Danielle, the cooperation between the Jewish Agency and ICEJ, especially when it comes to the issue of Aliyah and helping the Jewish people return to Israel, the ancient covenant homeland. And we literally see with that you are actually working on the front lines in fulfilling Bible prophecy, as we know that the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah talk about the Jewish people returning back to their ancient homelands in the days we're living in. Share with us the cooperation and how this is so exciting to be involved in this pioneering work to bring the Jewish people home back to the land of Israel.
So working with ICEJ is wonderful. I just yesterday I spent actually the entire day with a director of ICEJ from your Jerusalem office, with Nicole Yoder, who was there on the video you were showing before, the director of ICEJ Aid. And we were visiting different programs of the Jewish Agency that ICEJ has directly impacted, and meeting Olim, sharing their stories of Aliyah, their passion, their reason for making Aliyah, their faith. And that was such an amazing moment to be there together with Nicole, to look at her, to see her, looking at me, and to kind of say, you did it, girl. It's in a way a great partnership. We work very closely with ICEJ in the Jerusalem office. We also work very closely with ICEJ's Aliyah director based out of Russia, Howard Flower. Really, ICEJ has a wonderful team. And what's special about working with ICEJ is that we know that if there is a hardship, if there is a prayer request, we know that it can get to branches, far and wide. We know that there are people there with faith and with courage and with integrity that will act and that will speak the truth about Israel. We know that there is an ability and a capacity to raise funds, also for causes that you can't really talk about. I can tell you that yesterday when I was with Nicole, she was meeting with Olim coming from countries that I can't say the name of the country on this kind of broadcast or really tell you anything about it, but just to say that Jewish lives were saved from those countries, that it's just unbelievable how Jews come out of there. And Nicole was there meeting with them, knowing that ICEJ played a role in helping them. She cannot publicize it, she cannot talk about it, but yet she is there raising funds for it and galvanizing support for it. So that says a lot about the kind of relationship and friendship that we have.
Excellent. And Danielle, as we approach 2022, it looks like the Jews in the Ukraine would be in serious problems, as we see there's something like 100,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, and that tension is escalating. We're also seeing the remaining Jews in war-torn Ethiopia in a desperate situation. When we see these kind of major crises arise, this is when we see the Jewish Agency come to its fore, don't we? Can you just describe how you plan to get Jewish people out of very difficult countries? And if it wasn't for the Jewish Agency, I dread to think what anti-Semitism would be, because Israel is the answer to Jew hatred around the world.
Yes, so in a way, the fact that Israel is today, it means that there are places around the world where it's not only Jews that are suffering. You know, obviously, if there is a war in Ukraine, everyone in Ukraine will suffer. But one thing we can say is that, you know, Ukrainian citizens, if they'll try to take refuge in different places, some might accept them, some might not. They can go into deeper parts of the country, further away from the border. But for Jews, we know that there is this unique saving grace that since 1948, the State of Israel, the Jewish Agency are saying very strongly and very clearly, never again will there be a situation that a Jewish person is at risk of being persecuted, has a dream or wishes to escape a nightmare, and that the doors are closed. The doors of Israel, the gates of Aliyah, will always be open for any Jewish person. This means that the Jewish Agency works very closely with different security official bodies within Israel to make sure that we have plans in place and different opportunities to bring out Jews in danger. We've done it in the past. We've done it whether it's from war-torn Ethiopia back in 1991, whether it was Jews out of burning Sarajevo, whether it was out of Georgia after and during the war between Georgia and Russia. We have the ability to do so, and we hope and pray that we don't have to do it. We want people to come out because they are ready to come out and not because they are being forced out, but we have the option of doing this. When it comes to what's happening in Ukraine, you can also take a look at what's happening in Belarus and the way that the country there is going through a very difficult time, and what it means to be a person living today in Belarus who wishes to live a life of freedom and the inability to do so any longer in Belarus. It's very sad to say, a country that was, you know, hoping to join the European Union in many ways, and just, I mean, I know that you did Brexit, but other countries want to join the European Union. So very heartbreaking to see. And in Ethiopia, you know, what can I say? You know, after you visit Ethiopia, I visited a number of times, and you meet with members of the Jewish community, and you see the conditions in which they are living, and you realize that today, on top of those general conditions of poverty, you have COVID, and on top of that, you have the civil war, and really this harsh situation of being a citizen in a country that you know that as a citizen you're not safe. As a Jewish person, you're a bargaining chip, and Israel is prepared to bring and to rescue and to carry people home.
I've got two final questions before we wind up, Danielle. Two very important questions. Firstly, you worked with the new president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, who has an incredible British and Irish heritage. And he was the chairman of the Jewish Agency up until his appointment as the new president. Share with us what it's like to work with Isaac Herzog, and what are your thoughts on him being Israel's new president?
So we couldn't be prouder that he is Israel's new president. While we were all sad to see him go, how can you possibly really be sad about something that relates, you know, to your organization, which he had served for 3 years, when you know that now he's in a position where he can do for all of the people of Israel, and to be in a position that is really also part of the legacy in a way of his family, being the grandson of Israel's first chief rabbi, who was also the chief rabbi of Ireland and Great Britain, to be the son of Israel's sixth president and ambassador to the United Nations, the legacy that comes from that, when his late father made that famous, beautiful speech negating the UN decision that Zionism equals racism and tearing the paper on which it was written. And with Isaac Herzog, I can tell you that one of the things that makes him very special, and perhaps he got this from his grandfather, these are stories that we've heard and read, is that he sees every person as a person. You know, we're told by the Bible that we are all made in the image of God. And I think that Isaac Herzog sees people that way. It doesn't matter if you're a child, if you're old, it doesn't matter if you're poor, if you're educated, uneducated, if you're an oligarch of the world, or if you're a poor person out of work. he sees each person with that inner sparkle, with that image of God, has the patience to listen, to be there with them, and he's always finding ways to help. So I think that that is a wonderful quality for the role of President of Israel, to be the first citizen. You know, the term president, it actually comes from the Bible, the word nasi. It's not like in English that it means to preside or to rule. And in Hebrew, the word nasi means that you are high, that you are elevated, but not because of your rank, because of your spirituality, because of the role that you have to represent your people, whether in the times of the Bible it was your tribe, or whether later on it was to be the president of the Sanhedrin, of the Great Rabbinic Council post the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. And so it is so natural for him in a way to be in that role. And I will say to you something that I did learn from him, and I think that we all learned during COVID, that you always have to be prepared to look at things in a new and in a fresh way. And whenever you're encountering a problem, to not despair, but to perhaps find a new way to deal with it. So if I may, I would like to quote to you actually from the Bible, from Isaiah 43, verse 19, where it is said, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." When you think about what has happened during COVID, when you think about how everything just seemed to be closing down, you know, literally, figuratively, when you're thinking about Aliyah, thousands of flights canceled, borders closed, government offices on shutdown. You don't understand, how are you going to manage this thing? How are people going to come to Israel? And yet Israel kept its doors open. And even when Israeli citizens couldn't fly anywhere, you know, they couldn't go on vacations, they couldn't go abroad to meet their loved ones, the gates were opened for Aliyah. And Olim continued coming, because indeed we did find these new ways, and God did make ways for us in the wilderness and in the desert, and Aliyah went on. And this is one of the things that I learned from Isaac Herzog.
A fabulous message for us all. So thank you for sharing that with us, Danielle. And finally, we're so grateful that you're in your position. We thank you for your warmth and your hospitality towards the Christian evangelical community, and how you're reaching out to us tonight as well. But how can we help you as Christians who love Israel, who love the Jewish people, who stand up and fight for Israel? How can we help you and the Jewish Agency?
Thank you, Simon. That is very Christian of you. That is a very generous, kind question to ask. I think that it's very important as people with faith, and that who read the Bible and that know the truth about Israel, whether it's because, you know, people visited, people have the heart for it, people hear the truth from, you know, whether it's through ICEJ or through other sources. I think that the most important thing is to stand up for your faith and to speak the truth about Israel. And, you know, I think that many Christians who love Israel, they think about the words of the Bible, I will bless those who bless you, and they want to bless Israel. But, you know, in a way, what does it mean to bless? It has different components. To bless means that you can bless in your thoughts, you can bless in your actions, you can also bless in your words, because in Hebrew, when you make a blessing, it's very often you're saying something. You're making a blessing over the bread, or you're making a blessing over a new fruit that has grown. So speaking the truth is making a blessing for the Jewish people. Speak the truth about Israel, speak the truth about Judaism, stand up against anti-Semitism, against BDS, whether you have the ability to do it in the halls of power and politics, whether you do it in your church, whether you do it with your family, with your friends, whatever way it is, to speak the truth about Israel. Another way that is very important is, of course, the power of prayer and the power of supporting Israel in that way. There are, of course, ways, now less available during COVID, to come and visit and to volunteer, to lend a hand. I know that you can do it also in the ICEJ Haifa home for Holocaust survivors. And of course, one very critical way is through giving. And any person can give according to their hearts and according to their ability. And I know that there are many causes, and I would never say to a person, you should give to the Jewish Agency or to Aliyah and not give to the poor of your city or to needs around you, but find a way to give. Find a way to give, because this is part of what God is doing. You know, very often when people are seeking their path in life, you can see, you know, where God is acting. You can see where the changes are happening, and you can find so many of that happening in the direction of Israel. So if you point yourself in that direction, and you point your giving and your prayers in that direction, surely you are fulfilling this amazing role that after 2,000 years, with the state of Israel being established, with friendship growing between Jews and Christians, finally, this is a role you can step into. So why not step into that role, step into that story, make a gift, make a prayer, bless Israel in your hearts, in your prayers, in your words. Be a friend of Israel, be a friend of the Jewish Agency.
Fabulous. And, you know, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Danielle, I think we've got a few minutes where we can actually read out a few questions. But I'll just allow David to take over now. David, can you share with us the cooperation that ICEJ UK has with Danielle and the Jewish Agency?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Danielle, that was absolutely fabulous. I think, you know, so enlightening to us. And it reminds me of that famous statement in the Balfour Declaration: we are partners together in this great enterprise. And this is a wonderful enterprise of Aliyah. And for the years that I've been involved with ICEJ, and as Danielle mentioned earlier, with Howard Flower, all our efforts have been channeled through there. But I do want to thank all our UK supporters who just rise up to every challenge that is presented either via the Jewish Agency or from Howard, whether it's for the Ethiopian Jews, the Benai Manasseh from India, and so on. And it is at the forefront of our mission. As I said, it was at the start of our mission and our calling within ICEJ, and it is still going to play a major part. And following that inspirational talk tonight, I hope many others will see how important that role and that relationship in this greater enterprise is. So thank you, Danielle. I do appreciate all that you do and all that the agency does.
Well, so this is just a quick opportunity for anyone who'd want to quickly send a message, maybe a message of support, maybe a question to Danielle, just write it in the box. So we've only got a few minutes left. But Danielle, I just want to thank you for the work you do. And it's so special, really special, when Israel reaches out to evangelical Christians, because you know, because of what God has placed in our heart, and that's a genuine love for Israel and the Jewish people, that when times get very tough like they are now, when we're seeing rises of Jew hatred rise to the levels that we haven't seen them before since the 1930s, when we see that the Iranian regime is close to acquiring nuclear weapons and threatening to destroy Israel, when we see the likes of ISIS and Hezbollah in Syria and in southern Lebanon with Hamas firing rockets and missiles, one thing you can be assured of is that as Christians, we're standing with you and we're fighting for you, and that your cause is our cause. And we're very much following in the footsteps of Naomi, of Ruth, in supporting Naomi. And this is why this relationship is so special, because you're a special people, because you live in a special land, because God's given you that land. And it's an imperative that we stand up and we speak up for Israel and the Jewish people, because we know that this is God's will for us to do so. And that's why it's so important that you're on today and reaching out to so many evangelical Christians around the world, because we have a tremendous love for you as a people, but also as a nation.
Thank you, Simon. That is so meaningful. And, you know, these are exactly the threats that you mentioned are the threats that, you know, keep so many people awake at night. And when you think about, you know, God is my shepherd, I shall not want, even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death. And, you know, you think about your faith, and then you know that there are other people that are guided that way by faith. And to know that you are friends and that you're all over the world praying and supporting us is a huge blessing. So thank you.
I just want to thank all of you who have joined this live Jerusalem Dispatch ICEJ Zoom event. This is the last Zoom event of 2021, so we look forward to hosting you in 2022. I think we have an historic opportunity to stand with Israel more in 2022, to be more vocal in our support and show that practical love and support that Israel needs. And you can do that through supporting the incredible work of ICEJ UK and also the work of the Jewish Agency. And so we want to thank you so much for giving up your evening to be with us tonight. I want to wish you a very happy Christmas and a very happy New Year as we enter into 2022. So shalom and God bless. Thank you all.
Catch the wind, he's carrying you.